Today we're going to be talking about soil and petiole testing within your vineyard. Soils are very important, and understanding the soil in your vineyard is important to understand vigor control in the vineyard. So what's going to happen in the soil in terms of water and nutrient holding capacity and rooting volume will determine how large a vine you can get, how large a crop you can get, and how ripe that crop will get. First, we're going to talk about soil sampling within the vineyard, samples that you will collect in the vineyard and send off to a lab to be analyzed for not only chemical but biological and physical attributes as well. So it's important to get a good representative sample of the soil within the vineyard. So what we recommend is that you consult a soil survey of your vineyard beforehand to see how the soil types change within the vineyard, and then do appropriate sampling within each of those different soil types. So it's important to not just go out and dig one hole and think that's representative of your whole vineyard. You want to be able to take several samples within a soil type and then take samples across the different soil types in your vineyard, because the soil type, texture, physical and chemical properties will determine how your roots will grow and how those vines will perform in the end. So what we'll go over is how to take a soil sample, and basically it's a low-tech system of just taking out a shovel and digging up soils in different holes throughout the vineyard and taking a representative soil sample by mixing that soil up in a bucket and then taking a sample of that and sending it in for analysis. So there's different kinds of soil probes you can use. The low-tech way is just to pull out a shovel to take a sample from 0 to 8 inches in the vineyard, and then from 8 to 16 inches in the vineyard. There are other types of soil probes. If you're doing more of a soil survey, they're thinner probes that you just stab into the ground, takes out a core, and you put that in a bucket and mix it up. There's even other kinds of augers you can use if you're trying to get deeper into the soil and get a core out of that soil, to put into a bucket, mix it up with the other soil samples of your representative soil type that you then collect, put into a bag, and send off to the lab that's going to do the analyses. Now there's other things you can do in the vineyard to look at both soil moisture within the vineyard and other attributes such as soil compaction, and there's different instruments that you can use in the vineyard for that. There are two, one fairly expensive and one fairly inexpensive soil penetrometers that look at soil compaction, and it's basically a probe that you stick into the ground, and it measures the amount of resistance that probe tip is feeling. The inexpensive models just give you an analog readout, and you can see what the compaction is, and if the reading gets up to about 300, that is the level at which roots can penetrate. So if you get compaction that is more than 300 pounds per square inch, then the roots have a hard time penetrating that, and you have a compaction layer that needs to be broken up in the vineyard. More expensive models of the same instrument will measure the amount of compaction with depth that you can then hook up to the computer, and you can actually look at a soil profile of the compaction layers within the vineyard. When we look at compaction, we like to take measurements underneath the vine, which hasn't had any tractor or other equipment running through the vineyard, which will give you what that compaction is and how the roots can grow underneath the vine. We like to take one within the wheel track, where in many of our vineyards that are 50 years old, the tractors have been going up and down the same spots for the last 50 years, and there'll be compaction where the wheel track is. We like to measure compaction in that wheel track to see when we have to go through and break up the soil to allow the roots to spread throughout the vineyard. Finally, when you're looking at soil moisture, there's different ways to deal with soil moisture in the vineyard. One is just to measure the percent soil moisture, and there are probes that are out there that do that. The one that we have at the lab is called a TDR probe, and it sends an electrical impulse down the prongs of the instrument, and the time at which the electrical signal goes out and comes back will give you an idea of your percent soil moisture. The other way to deal with soil moisture in the vineyard is to actually measure how the vines are getting. Okay, next we're going to talk about actually measuring what gets into the vine in terms of nutrients and water. So it's nice to know what's going on in the soil, and it's very important to know what's going on in the soil in your vineyard, but almost more importantly, you want to know what your vines are getting, because sometimes moisture and nutrients that are in the soil, for whatever reason, restricted root growth, phylloxera pressure on your root system, may not allow the water and nutrients get to the vine. So it's also important to measure what's getting into your vine, and if there's a problem, you can measure it in the vine and be able to correct it in your vineyard. One of the things we do for nutrients is to take plant tissue samples during the season to have sent off for analysis and understand the nutrient uptake within the vine. What we do is we collect petiole samples at either bloom or veraison. We have standard samples for both. And at bloom time, you want to take petioles that are on the leaf opposite either the basal or medial cluster in concord. And at veraison time, which is typically about 70 days after bloom in concord, you want to take petioles from the most recently mature leaf. And you determine that by when a leaf expands out to roughly 80% of its final size. We say that's the most recently mature leaf, and you can take the petiole from there. And you can also determine that by flipping a concord leaf over, and when the back side of the leaf starts to turn brown, you know that it's in that category of most recently mature leaf. In terms of water getting into the vine, what we do here at the lab is we take a pressure bomb measurement, and it's called a midday stem potential. And basically, the way I like to talk about it is that the leaf is like a sponge that has water in it. And when the sponge is dry, you have to squeeze very hard to get that water out. And when the sponge is very wet, you don't have to put very much pressure on to get the water to come out. Leaves are in a similar way, that we take the leaf, we cut it off of the vine, and we put it in a pressure chamber. And if you squeeze that leaf very hard before you see water shoot out, that means the vine is under water stress. And if you squeeze it very lightly and water comes out, that means that the vine has plenty of water. So pressure bomb measurements can give you an idea of what's going on in the vineyard in terms of vine water status that can be matched up with what you measured in percent soil moisture within the vineyard. We're collecting petioles for nutrient analysis in Concord vineyards. In this case, we take a typical Concord shoot. The base of the shoot is where it inserts into the vine, and the growing end is the apex or tip. If this was at bloom time, what you'd do is you'd collect petioles that were opposite either the basal or medial cluster. This shoot happens to have 2 clusters. Sometimes Concord has 3. And what you do is just break off the leaf opposite that cluster. So you also want to remember to take a shoot that actually has a crop on it. And then if you look at the leaf itself, there's the blade and the petiole. The petiole is like the stem of the leaf, and you just break that off. And you collect about 50 to 100 of these petioles from a treatment or area in the vineyard. You put that into a bag and send it off for nutrient analysis. Now we are just about at veraison, which is about 70 days after bloom in Concord. And the standard sample at that time is to take the most recently mature leaf, which is where the leaf is about 80 to 90% of its full size. So as you go down this chute, you can see that the leaves are big and then they become small. You look for one that is about fully mature. You can also do that by looking at the underside of your Concord leaf, and when it starts to turn brown, you know that it's about mature. So it would probably be this leaf or this leaf on this shoot. And again, you just break that leaf off, you break off the petiole, and you want to collect 50 to 100 of these per whatever treatment you're running to send in for nutrients.